Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
Hey, good afternoon. We are sitting here on the eve of I don't know, it's a massive hack. It's questionable. It seems like all this NFT stuff is revealing itself to be some of the absolute worst aspects of the early crypto trading. It's like there's so many scams that are just emerging left and right. Like freaking Ozzy Osbourne tried to launch an NFT and shared a scam, and people lost oodles and oodles of money. Oh, by the way, it's like 53 degrees out and sunny, and it's pretty nice out in the Midwest. We're getting a little reprieve from that polar vortex. But back to this whole like technology thing. This stuff's actually pretty incredible. You know, let's see, what was it? OpenSea made $300 million in 30 days, and you know they just got hacked. And if you just look for any kind of NFT hack in Google News, you get like, you know, an unlimited list going back, you know, as far back as you really want to look. This stuff is crazy, and it's for like digital media too. Did you read about the adopted son of the granddaughter of Pablo Picasso releasing NFTs, and there was all sorts of flack within the Picasso family, and essentially, like Claudio, I think it's Claudio Picasso, the guy who's in charge of the family, who's like finally acquiesces, like fine, just make them. And so here's this kid who's not even really, I guess he's growing up within the culture of the family, but he's not actually a Picasso, and he's getting to ride off of those coattails. It'll be interesting to see, because this is clearly like an intellectual property ownership thing, and I don't know, it just seems like if somebody else decided to release a guitar and called it the Fender Stratocaster Edition, they'd get sued into oblivion. I mean, obviously some company other than Fender.
It's like, I don't know, has the I guess I don't keep up with guitar prices, but has the lumber shortage impacted those?
You know, it seems like the whole guitar industry itself during pandemic got a huge surge because people had all sorts of free time, so they were going out and they weren't going out and doing things in public, they were staying home and doing the things they always wished they had time to do. So guitar sales in the mid-range, it seemed to surge. There seemed to be shortages of guitars, not because of a supply chain issue, because most of those guitars had been manufactured well in advance, but people were buying the shit out of them. And then so like mid-range amplifiers were hard to come by. All of a sudden, the only thing that were available were like really high-end instruments and high-end amplifiers. And it was actually kind of cool, because it seemed like for the last 2 years, there's been this kind of renaissance in guitar building in the Luthering process. And within the amplifier design world, all of these things have gone through like pretty vast improvements. And it's because more people have time to do these things, because they're not busy worrying about, you know, socializing or going to a bar. I think synthesizers got hit hardest because of chip shortages and the availability of electronic components. And so a lot of that market, I think, is driven by like orders, and you got to pre-order so they can buy a volume of components, and then whatever they have left is however many they get to produce after the orders are filled. But even then, for the last 2 years, I've read about some of the coolest synthesizers being released, and a lot of them are software. But even still, those things eventually can become hardware, as is the case with like so many Arturia synthesizers. These are all things that I'm pretty sure they all kind of were birthed in a computer. And it's just a matter of time before those things can translate. Or some things are built in a computer, and then the computer interface is designed to emulate a synthesizer. So it's given keyboard and knobs and buttons, but at its heart, it's really Linux running on top of some system on a chip, custom designed, ARM processor. I think those are actually the most exciting. And like once it's revealed, like that, oh yeah, there's some synthesizers built on some open architecture of Linux, then it's possible to create, an entire microcosm of support for that operating system and that synthesizer itself. And then maybe at some point after, some genius synthesis coder. I realize that's probably a narrow net actually. We'll figure out how to, bootstrap or side load a new synthesis algorithm on top of existing hardware. That would be really cool.
Do you ever use Max MSP?
Man, that's like one of the craziest synthesizers I haven't used it in years. I tried it for a while. It was being bundled with Ableton Live. That's a crazy synthesis environment. It's because it doesn't look like a synthesizer at first. It's all
right.
It's all like really, just generic objects that you're linking to each other. In a lot of ways, it's like it's a streamlined version of Native Instruments Reactor, and it's like a native version of the Kima synthesizer, which was all DSP based. But that's one the kind of thing like the open architecture digital synthesis. It's like everything about modular synthesis, but only limited by the computer and the imagination. Because if you need a different oscillator, you can just add one. Or if you want to cross modulate against a different modulator, you can just create one. Or you can link it to the output of something else. I always thought Max was really incredible, but it was always it was really daunting because it was so cerebral to set up.
Yeah, you really have to know what you're doing with that set of I guess it's its own language, but it's also its own synthesis program. So
yeah,
it's like a weird one.
Well, I think you can do a lot of really insane scripting, like stuff. You can script actions that to a normal person be like, why the hell is that even happening? It's like, oh, you'll see.
Yeah.
When I watch videos of people on YouTube who are really good at that stuff, it always blows my mind. They're like, yeah, let's just see what happens when we connect this here. Oh yeah, that's good. Let's run this sequence, and then all of a sudden it's like some kind of Aphex Twin stuff.
Yeah, it's like it's not necessarily gonna be mainstream pop sounding stuff, but
it might not even be musical sounding.
Right.
It might be some really serious noise.
Yeah.
But it might be a really cool sounding noise that could be used musically.
Yeah, I never heard anything that was like pop music or anything. Not to say that that's the pinnacle, but I feel like pop music is the most mainstream acceptable aesthetic that is electronic music.
Yeah.
and derived from. It doesn't have to be an analog synthesizer, but any sort of synthesis that's not like an acoustic instrument.
Man, BT produced that NSYNC song that has like the Guinness record for the most number of edits for the vocal track, and it birthed the stutter effect. Like him manually editing that shit on a plane, like it eventually led to like, man, there's got to be a better way to do this, and then they create like the stutter effect. That's insane, and that was super mainstream. NSYNC was like the most mainstream pop group in the world for a while, and that was
Definitely.
like a huge song. Can't even remember what it was called now. Pop, who knows? At one point,
Well,
we all knew it.
and it's like it's really easy to be like, oh, NSYNC is just the like dollar store version of Backstreet Boys, but then you realize like 98 Degrees and shit existed. So there's different levels of popdom that NSYNC was at the top, just the same as the Backstreet Boys, but people like to make it seem as if somehow Backstreet Boys were like more successful or something. I
mean,
don't know.
New Kids on the Block are still touring, so
Right.
I'm pretty sure that they're killing it with a really specific age group. And when the Backstreet Boys age group it comes of age, Backstreet Boys will be back on tour, and same with NSYNC. They'll all be back on tour at some point. It'll be a nostalgia tour, of course, but they'll make oodles and oodles of money.
It's been like 25 years since Backstreet Boys were popular.
Yeah.
Like, they're definitely about the. It's just, I don't think that they. It's like, I don't know if they are willing to perform together or something, or maybe they just started recently or something. Because a lot of that has to do with the people's capacities to work with each other.
Oh, yeah.
Because I saw, have you ever, you know, Belle Biv DeVoe?
Oh, yeah.
I saw that one of my friends from like when I was young, her like she went to the same church as my parents, and she's like married to the brother of one of the group members, but it's like they're still out performing. I don't know if they ever even stopped, and it's like they were popular before we were cognizant, you know. It's like they just like never stopped performing, basically.
Talk about like a career that requires extreme athletics, essentially nonstop.
Yeah, that's like, yeah, the routines have so much dancing.
I'm looking at a
involved. It's
picture
like-
of New Kids on the Block 2022 concert tour date stuff, and I mean, they all look like they're in shape. None of these guys look like Vince Neil or anything like that.
No, you really got to be in shape to dance and sing. But that's where, like, Paula Abdul was famous for lip syncing in her performances, like, which is like understandable when you have a shitload of
Backstreet Boys are doing a world tour.
choreography. There you go.
They all look like they're in shape too.
Yep, it's the nostalgia tour
Yep.
at that time.
Is NSYNC doing a tour?
Probably, right? It's about that time.
It looks like it. Yep, looks like they've got official Ticketmaster tour dates. Good for them.
Yep. Come see all your favorites. Make you feel like you're a teenager again.
Oh,
Only $75,000.
it's like there's going to be 20 mornings where a bunch of people all wake up and their backs hurt like they haven't moved in decades, and they're going to have like plantar fasciitis like they've never experienced before, and they won't be able to walk, and they're going to like have to crawl to the bathroom.
Yeah.
And then they'll remember what it's like to be young again.
Yeah, it's hard going from zero to partying.
Oh man, I think that's why people take drugs. And not the fun ones either, the ones that just make it so you can walk. I do want to go back to like, Detroit Electronic Music Festival at some point after, well, we're approaching the endemic phase of pandemic. And I think I read it was like they believe that 73% of the population of Indiana has either been exposed to COVID or is vaccinated. And so the conditions are approaching herd immunity, desired herd immunity levels, until the next variant comes in. And
Well, and I saw they might do a fourth shot
yeah,
in the fall, so
yeah,
I'll definitely be getting that shit because I haven't gotten COVID yet. So
yeah.
knock on wood. I mean, at this point, I'm like, it's not that I don't want to get it, but it's more so I know if I get it, I'm just not gonna die from it because of like having 3 shots, and it's like would likely be a less deadly variant because all of the waves of the most deadly variants have passed. It seems like.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as I can tell.
Well, from all of the information that's being reported, there are these newer variants have higher survivability, which is good. They still haven't. The jury is still out on who gets long COVID, although it might be linked to gut bacteria. And
well,
what's that?
Well, I was gonna say that long COVID shit is like the worst part, where not being able to like walk up a flight of stairs or just walk longer than 50 feet or some shit. That's the real.
Well, that's just scary as hell.
Yeah, that's the real downs, or losing your sense of taste or smell forever.
Yeah.
That would be rough.
I think
I mean, rough is an understatement.
Well, on top of that, any COVID exposure is a stroke risk.
Yeah.
So, and myocarditis is also becomes a risk once you've been exposed to COVID. So it's kind of, there's still a bunch of horrible shit that can happen even if you get it and don't have a severe case.
Yeah.
I think that's what the research has demonstrated. There's just so many horrible things that can still happen. It's like, I still don't get it. We know what happens. We know how this stuff works. We know how this thing attacks the body. It's been demonstrated over and over again. It's getting less severe. So I get it. We can start to resume normal behaviors and activities, and life can get back to whatever people thought was normal. And that's cool. That's good stuff. But this thing can still kill people. I think that's the part that really gets me. It's this last version of it seems to affect kids more than it did before.
Yeah, and I'm wondering how much of the numbers shifting down is because they're not getting tests out, so they just can't even say shit is related to COVID because they don't have the proper tests. We ordered tests, what was it, last month? Oh, it may have even been in January at this point. Like, I feel like it was the end of January. Those 4 COVID tests.
Oh, yeah.
And there's like still no word of when they're going to even ship out.
You should have received an email with the tracking information. I got one. I
received an email that I would get tracking information, but I didn't get the tracking information yet. So it hasn't gone out. That's what I'm saying. I got the first email that was like, hey, you're going to get tracking information. Second email never came.
Wow.
Still, yeah, I can check.
Interesting,
Like,
because I've received
go
my
ahead.
4. I'm pretty sure we were all like right up in line as soon as I learned about it. It's like, yeah, I'm signing up for this thing. Government's gonna give me 4 COVID tests.
January 25th was when I placed the order.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah.
Nothing.
What are they calling the Sleepy Joe now? Brandon. Way to go, Brandon. Well, is this really is this the Biden administration or is this the post office?
I mean, at this point, which one can you separate it in the sense of like, if the post office can't this far into the Biden administration, we can't be like, this is because Trump replaced the guy or whatever. And it's like,
No, I'm not. I just mean like the overall, the prolonged, just seeming assault on the post office by our Congress. They've been, they were forced to pay into pensions like way into the future. It's like they're always framed as losing money, but they don't actually lose money. They're a service we pay for. It costs something, but it's like there's this never-ending framing and attack on our postal service. And I'm wondering, is this just like the long-term effect of all of that? We can't even distribute, COVID tests that are paid for and they're supposed to exist.
that's wild. Because then you'll have people who want the COVID tests to be distributed, like fighting for them to be distributed to everyone, when there's a bunch of people who don't actually want them. So people like me who want them don't get them because the people who are fighting for them to go to everyone are making it actually more difficult for people like me to get them. So it's this weird side effect of like setting aside enough COVID tests for all the people who don't want them that results in like everybody can't get them then, even if you want them. Because I know they're just stockpiled somewhere,
Well, there were all those COVID tests that expired in Florida. Yeah, I ordered mine on the 18th. And
January?
Yeah.
Yeah, it must have been a difference between 7 days, huh? I guess, like.
Man.
And when did you get did it say when you got your confirmation?
Let me, where is it? Post order confirmation.
This is going on a month now where I'm like, we just wanted to get them in case, but even if I had gotten it, it would have been
January 29.
Come and gone. Jeez, so it's like about a little. That's fucked up.
January 29. So 11 days.
Jeez, that's messed up.
Huh. So they didn't have enough. Lately, YouTube has been suggesting like videos about how to can food or how to store food for long periods of time. And it's I think it's because I was looking for foods that can be made like over a campfire or when camping.
realize it. I just realized yesterday, if you hover your arrow over a YouTube video, the thumbnail preview, and it starts to play, they add it to your history, and then it affects your watch list.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so if you have hovered above any videos that you didn't actually want to watch and ended up like, oh, okay, this isn't, and
Those mother.
because that's why I'm like, man, why am I getting these like random Jordan Peterson suggestions and all this other stupid shit? And I'm like, I'm not, what? Who do you think I am, YouTube? Some fucking right wing nutcase? Like, what the fuck is this shit? So,
I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm
then,
interested in how can I preserve like foods for long periods of time, but
oh yeah, I'm sure that's something that you're actually interested in
but
specifically as an individual. But
but I'm not trying to
this
build
was,
like, you know, half of the videos that they're suggesting are these dudes dressed up for like the post-apocalypse, like they're going to be wandering around beating each other with fucking crowbars, and it's like, what kind of future are these assholes preparing for? Like, because that's the one that they're going to experience for a short period of time until like the rest of civilized humans are like, no, fuck this shit, and they, you know, put that human down. Because I'm pretty sure during the post-apocalypse, there's no prison system. I don't think the post-apocalypse has like an advanced like judiciary system. There might be a jail while they decide what to do with somebody. But
yeah,
but like,
a lot of those. Sorry.
oh, it just seems like so many of these videos are just cosplay. Like, it's some dude who wants to wear like armor and walk around dressed up like a Mad Max thug. When the reality is, like, if humans don't essentially reform communities and figure out a way to protect those communities, like every member of the community, all of those resources are lost, and like all of that knowledge
Yeah.
is lost to amnesia, essentially group amnesia.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea that like one person's gonna sit in the on top of their house and shoot anybody that comes by, like that's just, that person's not gonna last. That person is gonna be,
Absurd.
yeah. It's like, what kind of asshole sits there preparing for the end of times where they end up shooting at their neighbors, like, or walking around looking looking like they're looking for trouble instead of going out in groups of people looking for resources. Because I don't know. That's my rant about the crazy shit that YouTube has decided I'm interested in lately. And I've tried to limit the reach that Google has. You know, they have their extensions that can prevent things from auto playing, but all that does is complicate playback of video across the entire browser experience.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like the fluidity of WebKit is also this horrible trap that once you're using it, no matter where you go, there you are, and they know it. At least with Facebook, they tell you like, oh yeah, this is happening because you're in Facebook.
It's really hard to get rid of that um, corporate cookie across the internet. Like they want all your info, not just when you use their product. They want all your info, and then they don't want to share the profit with you. It'd be so different if they were like, "Hey, we'll split this 50-50 since we're doing some, half the work because the other half is you actually doing stuff. So, yeah, we're doing some work, but you're the data that we want. So, yeah, we'll split this 50-50. No, we're going to take 100%, whether you like it or not, when you're not even using our stuff." And that's where it gets into this weird territory of like, oh, you signed on the dotted line. And it's like, well, I shouldn't have to constantly be avoiding exploitation in the sense of that existence is terrible. Like, if that's what capitalism is, that's legitimately a fucking horrible existence. And I don't know if people have really thought about like the implications of what it means to the to where it's not that, oh, you can just earn your living and then buy things and expect the thing you paid for to work. It's like, no, you get exploited when you're working. Then when you buy things, half the time they don't fucking work because they're using shitty materials to sell something at the most expensive like profit margin possible with the cheapest fucking pieces possible. So then it breaks when you actually use it. And then it's like, well, you get fucked on both sides. And then people are like, this is the best system in the world. It's like nothing fucking works.
Man,
And
it's only a matter of time before we have a DeWalt drill powered by Android that can analyze the amount of torque that the drive system is experiencing and modulate for the best cutting or drilling power or some shit. But you'll have to sign in to the service every time you want to use your drill.
oh god. Power tools as a service.
Oh man, yeah, it only works if you're on the internet. Well, you know, the John Deere crowd had a big victory. They're allowed to work on their tractors now, apparently.
Yeah.
And
how crazy is that? You had to fight to get the right to work on your own shit.
Yeah, well, it's there's this whole struggle like with this family in Massachusetts that were buying a brand new Subaru, but it couldn't be connected to the remote telemetry data stream because Massachusetts has some laws, and like even the dealerships like, yeah, don't you know somebody in like Vermont or Rhode Island? Then we can connect all the telemetric services, and they're like, no, sorry. And so this is a thing. I mean, Kia apparently had to do the same thing too. And so there are some places where it's like they don't want to give up their information. I get it because it's, you know, it's machine code. Who the fuck's going to be able to read it anyways? But it's important to the telemetry of the vehicle, and it tells the vehicle what to do, like when to apply the brakes for the traction control or the yaw control. Like if the stability management is dependent on telemetry, that's great. But nobody else needs that information except for the vehicle. And really, nobody needs that information except the manufacturer. It's not like that open source car that failed because they basically put a Camaro on top of a truck. It was crowd designed too, of course. And there's some things about like, you know, I like building computers, you know, I think it's fun selecting components and all that stuff, but there's some things that probably don't need to be tampered with. Like, I opened up an Xbox once, and everything was like just built into the motherboard. There was no user serviceable component.
Yeah. Yeah, once you realize that, it's like, well, shit, there's not much you can actually do. You can't just swap out parts very easily. You have to solder.
Yeah. Even the hard drives have like unique logic cards themselves. And so it's like I couldn't even put a bigger hard drive in it. And it's the same thing with so many consoles. Like, there's no point in trying to modify it. Most of that stuff is modular anyways. If it has a failure somewhere on a card somewhere, a board, they replace that whole board. It's so much easier. But not everyone has the tools or the training on how to disassemble one of these containers without destroying it. So that's why you send them in.
Well, and I guess I'm of the mind where there's a lot of things about the designs of cars that are not for the sake of the driver or the person servicing it, and it's like very obtuse that it either forces you to take it to the dealers to get it fixed or pay an exorbitant fee because the person fixing it has to do some ridiculous shit that takes way longer than it should.
Or it requires
Um,
specialized tools.
yeah, that's another part, and that is all of those things work to the point where the design decisions that make those things the end result aren't always for the sake of a better vehicle. And it's a lot of times it's super arbitrary where you're like, you would assume that they did it for a better cause, but then you're like, no, it's because the people designing these things aren't necessarily the same person throughout the the vehicle design. So it's like the person designing the center column in which the climate control for the back part of the vehicle sits isn't necessarily the same person designing the cabin space. Like it may be, but it may not be, because the
I
way
think there's
that
a
the
lot of
pieces are,
shoehorning going on with automotive design.
yeah, that's exactly what's happening. So it's
They
like,
have to fit something in there somehow, so they have to figure out where they can squeeze it and where they have space and how much of it has to be a remote interface or how much can be where can they do they have room under the seat?
yeah, exactly. So the design specs for certain parts are coming from one part of the chain that may not actually be the part that produces the end result, and then they have to shoehorn it in, and it looks and functions slightly different than anticipated. And that's how a lot of this shit feels.
You know, I think that the whole putting a giant tablet in the in the console is a bad idea. I think they
Definitely.
missed a really good opportunity to use what was essentially an existing screen, the rearview mirror.
Mm,
And I've seen some rearview mirrors that have smart features built into them, like it's a remote Android screen where it'll tap into your phone and display uh, your maps, or it'll let you know, it'll give you it has a feed from the rearview camera, things like that. And it does all the recording. So it's like basically an Android tablet that's shaped like a mirror, and you use it in place of your factory mirror. And I think that's a really good idea. And I think that that's like a logical place because we already look up there. There's plenty of space for a map. Do we really need a television sized screen in the middle of the car? Like, I just feel like that's a distraction waiting to happen.
definitely.
But I think to your point about how they have to cram things in. I think that's why we have SUVs, which are basically station wagons that are gigantic, and some of them are capable like trucks in terms of pulling boats and trailers, and that's cool. But I think that's why we have those, is because people want more stuff. They want their car to be more of a spaceship. The bigger it is, the more stuff your spaceship can have built into it. Then, of course, there's like the culture of the car culture that reflects what they see in like media or racing, and so they emulate their heroes. I think that's how we get. I think that's really how we get really cool hot rods and like tuner cars, because somebody sees something they saw in a movie or in a TV show or on YouTube, and they think, "Oh, that thing's awesome." They go and try and build their own.
Well, and to that note, it's like it's really hard to make tuner cars that were built after like 2005.
Yeah,
Um, Not necessarily because the factories are making it more difficult or anything, but it's like the bodies just were built in a different way that it wasn't really conducive to a bunch of different kits or anything. So um,
I think they started building them to look like they already had the kit on them.
that's very true.
Like a
That's
lot of
very
factory
true.
cars started looking more like Hot Wheels. Like Toyotas used to look like a Japanese Buick, and from like the 90s, and they were very understated. And then I think in the last like 10, 15 years, they've started looking really like they belong in anime. all of the Japanese cars look like they belong in anime because I think it's part of the cultural style of design. But you see it bleed through into Korean cars and into American cars eventually. Like in the lights and the way they design the lights, and they all look the same because they're all designed in wind tunnels, and there are only so many changes they can make with the design before they deviate and start to lose fuel economy. And
Yeah.
they all look like spaceships now.
Yeah, they definitely do. I like the non-Tesla electric stuff that's coming out. Not so much like if the Mustang had a different name, I feel like I would like it more. I don't necessarily hate it, but it just doesn't look like a Mustang. But as an electric vehicle, looks pretty cool. And then there's like a new Buick. I forget what the fuck it's called, but it looks pretty cool. And that's where I'm like, Teslas are, their design is okay, but I feel like it's a kid's version of what they think a cool car looks like. And then it's almost as if somebody took a Porsche and was like, I'm not copying a Porsche, but this looks exactly like a Porsche. And then
The Porsche Panamera looked better when it was called the Audi A7. And I don't think calling it a Tesla is an improvement. It's still a weird looking car. It can't decide if it's a sedan or a station wagon.
Yeah.
And it's actually huge. Even the small, like the Model 3 was huge. And that's cool.
I feel like
Model X's are gigantic.
yeah, and their wheelbase it looks off when you see it in person. I feel like it photographs better than it looks in person.
I think it'll all make sense once the Tesla colony's in place and everyone's driving a Tesla on Mars, and there are only Teslas on Mars because only Elon is crazy enough to send vehicles to Mars like that for people to drive around on. I think by the time that the Cybertruck is actually released, it'll be too late, and Ford and Chevy will dominate the electric truck market. Rivian will have given up and become like a second-tier brand or a high-tier brand within GM or something like that. They'll get bought out.
Yeah, it totally feels like people were waiting for an alternative to Tesla to emerge.
Well, I just think it's really ambitious for anyone to try and create a truck from scratch when like companies like Ford and General Motors have been doing it for like 100 years. Like,
Yeah.
and like, good luck catching up, guys. They've got a huge head start. I think Ford made an electric vehicle that can tow a train. Like, clearly they know what they're doing. So it's really going to come down to the batteries. I noticed that Teslas are finally appearing in the used car market, like in the random search. Like when I periodically cruise through Craigslist, I've noticed that Tesla Model S and Model 3s are starting to appear, 2013 models. And so those are 9 years old. That's like, that's approaching the end of their battery.
Yeah, and apparently they have terrible service. So it's really hard it seems like it's hard to keep them maintained. So I'm wondering if the people selling them are basically trying to offload lemons before people realize that they're not good secondhand vehicles. I'm assuming they're horrible secondhand vehicles, especially like third hand and fourth hand. Then,
And it's just like when a $90,000 car is on sale for like, or on the used market, and it's $30,000, and it's a 9-year-old Tesla. It's just a 9-year-old Tesla. It's like there's no, the listing. I didn't dive into the listing because I just didn't want to know. But 9 years, that's plenty of time to run through charge cycles, just kill that battery. And I get it, the batteries are better now than they were then, but the batteries then aren't as good as they are now. So,
Are they sick of it? Like, why? Why are you selling it then? If it was such an awesome vehicle, why are you selling it?
yeah, it's got to be one of the weird modules that they have to like disassemble the entire front clip to get to, and it probably costs like 10 grand to repair. And it'll run for like 3 or 4 more years if you take it easy on it, but there's no telling because there's no like culture of maintaining those cars yet. Not one that's obvious. It's just the evangelists who are like, oh, it's so great, trouble free, worry free. I don't even have to change the oil. All this stuff.
You can't trust those fuckers for a second. You can't trust those fuckers for a goddamn second.
Yeah, especially because in some of the threads, you can tell the evangelists like are just rabid because anyone mentions like the Bolt and they freak out at them. Granted, the Bolts catch on fire, and what was the other? The Hyundai, Kia electric vehicles also catch on fire, and like, so yeah, sure, there's some problems, but yeah, I just don't trust any of them. Like the people who pretend they can recharge their electric vehicles with their solar panels on their roof. Yeah, no. Maybe if they have like 20 acres of solar panels. Maybe if they're like the local solar panel plant.
People just can't help but lie, man. And apparently the Tesla solar panels don't work half the time, and then they catch on fire some of the times. And they also have terrible service.
Well, they had to settle with Walmart because they caught like multiple Walmarts on fire.
Jesus. I didn't hear about that one.
Yeah,
but I know
multiple Walmart facilities, warehouses were all like caught on fire. I think people were in them. I shouldn't be. It's not funny. It's like it's fucked up and sad. It's like, I guess it's kind of dark. That's probably why I'm snickering.
It is
about
dark.
Solar panels catching on fire.
Yeah, we're laughing at the solar panels catching on fire, not the people in the building. And it's like easy to make it seem like both are being laughed at if it's not clarified, which is also why it's like difficult to laugh at dark things, because then people are like, well, he was laughing at somebody in a fire. Like, no, that's not what the person was laughing at. And
it's the idea that these solar roof panels were supposed to revolutionize solar panel accessibility, and they catch on fire. It's like, it's the first time I ever read about solar panels catching on fire. I think that's the part that's funny. It's like, why? What we've had solar panels for like 50 years.
Elon Musk gets in the game, they start catching on fire. Suddenly.
Well, I mean, his car. There's a joke about how like cars didn't burst into flames until Tesla's started appearing on the road, and like
not since the Gremlin.
Yeah. He wants to like,
or the Pinto, was both? I guess both of them.
Or, yeah, Chevy Nova maybe, I don't know. It's one of those small cars. I think maybe it was a Ford, but anyway.
I think there's a couple of them too.
But it's like the Starship's made out of stainless steel, and it's supposed to be coated with some other kind of ceramic that's not that's more. It's less brittle than the one NASA uses and can be made, to withstand more because of stainless steel's heat tolerances. They're building a freaking oven.
Basically.
I mean, they haven't put people in it yet. They even launched the thing? They've launched it, right? I keep reading about it like it's supposed to be ready to go, but
I thought they just did a successful firing test.
Okay. Oh man. So earlier this morning I was reading about a new habitat, Mars habitat design that's getting a lot of attention because they they think they've solved a problem of radiation exposure. They're going to build these habitats inside craters, like impact craters. So it'll protect a significant portion of the structure. Most of it can be underground and it'll be domed. But it occurred to me that most of Mars is covered in like iron. And that would kind of turn a crater into a dish, which means it focuses like electromagnetic energy at a point somewhere, potentially directly above or maybe even inside their domed structure. This just led me into this whole like science fiction world where they build a dome and because of a solar flare, like everything inside the dome gets cooked.
I mean, maybe that's part of it though. Like maybe the fact that it is iron is what allows them to create some sort of like electromagnetic
Like a shield.
shield. Yeah. That's like using something to like polarize the ion, like, or either polarize or ionize particles in a local area to create
Well,
a
that makes
radiation
sense.
shield.
There are like localized weather patterns. There's sometimes you find valleys that don't get any snow, and there's a blizzard everywhere else. I remember one year there was it was like there was just torrential downpour, and it was like flooding in Tennessee even, and then we got like a real bad cold snap up here, but it didn't happen like in Tennessee. It just stayed wet, and it's because of the topography of the land. It like sheltered them from something, but everything else in the Midwest was like covered in ice. So that would make sense that there'd be some kind of like localized electromagnetic field created by a dish of iron. Because we don't really have those here.
Yeah. I mean, and in some cases where there is like an iron deposit, it does create like an effect on the magnetic field in the area. So that's where you have those places in the like in the West where there are iron deposits, but they have like myths associated with the area.
Yeah.
But then you find out there's like just magnetic fields like near the iron ore deposit.
I went to a tourist trap one time in New Mexico that was it was like a magnetically active area. And so the magnetometer on my phone was going crazy.
Yeah, and shit like that will affect people's internal field sensors or whatever. You know, I think ours aren't as good as birds, but you know, we have them.
Yeah.
So if they're being thrown off by something like that, then people perceive it as like magic or evil force or something.
I wonder what kind of potential large craters have for radio telescopes, like off-Earth radio telescopes. Because a lot of the issues with that whole field is coming from like interference from the ground. But once we get that stuff in space, like an Arecibo on the moon, it could be gigantic. It could be the size of 10 of them. Oh, that'd be pretty big. And like, if there's a giant crater on Mars, it's already ready to go. It's a big magnetic dish. Maybe we don't need to have Earth-based astronomy. Maybe we can fill the sky up with Starlinks, and communication satellites, and leave windows open for launch. Have big launch windows that come around once a day or something like that, or a space elevator. Space elevator would be the coolest, of course. and then just put all of our long range research facilities on Mars or on the moon.
Mm-hmm.
We don't even have to have humans there. We can just have machines controlling the telescopes and sending data back.
Yeah, because like I'm trying to see the the Webb telescope is
Maybe Mars has too much dust, but it doesn't have it. It doesn't have it doesn't have a Van Allen belt, so it wouldn't have any local big magnetic
oh
fields to contend with.
the Webb telescope is at a Lagrange point between the Sun and the Earth, L2. So then Hubble is much closer to Earth's surface than that one.
We need a telescope on the other side of the moon, where it's really dark. That way they can really, like once a month, the moon will swing around it and block out the sun completely and get really big images of everything away from the Earth and the sun.
I think China was trying to put one
Leave it to China to put a camera on the moon that takes better pictures than the ones that we. I hope they can do it. I really do. Yeah, and it turns out that rocket that's going to hit the moon is probably a Chinese rocket. One of their earlier Chang'e missions.
Yeah.
Still funny. It would have been funny if it was a SpaceX rocket, but it's still funny.
Yeah, didn't. Oh, wait. It says China's had a telescope on the moon for the past 2 years in 2015.
Huh.
From the Chang'e 3.
Man, why don't we have a giant telescope on the dark side of the moon? There's so much of the moon lunar space activity right now that reminds me of Space Force, the TV show. It's like every step, it seems like every time something cool happens, I go and look it up and read about it, and lo and behold, the Chinese have been doing it for the past, have 2 more years on us.
Mm-hmm. So SpaceX launched a bunch of satellites, and then there was a solar storm that knocked a significant amount of them out, and they just fell back to Earth.
Oh.
They launched 49, and 40 of them fell back.
Wait, at $1 million per payload, right? Isn't that what it is, or something like that?
I think so. Jeez. It looks like they still have roughly 2,000 satellites still orbiting, but down 40 from one storm. Which begs the question, how often do these storms happen and how many get taken out? Because it's like, surely that's not the first or last instance of that.
Well, we're at the beginning. We're not the beginning. We're like a year and some change into the that high activity solar period. And so for the next 10 years, it's only going to increase. And then after that 10-year point, it's supposed to decrease back down and then go down another 10 years until it gets to that low point of like no solar activity. So by the time I'm 50, we should be at peak solar activity. By the time I'm 70, it'll be at the absolute lowest solar activity. I'm okay with that. That's cool. I can deal with this. There's some long-term planning that's going on right now.
Man, like the radiation isn't that bad. Huh. Yeah, coronal mass ejections are down. Because sometimes you look at space weather and the radiation levels are like in the red for the flight altitude, and it's like, man, those are the real bad days. But right now, none of it's in the red. Uh, as far as
The sun's not
the
pissed
levels
off.
of radiation, yeah,
The sun's having a good day.
directly. Yeah, because some days it's like it's unbelievable how much radiation's actually entering our atmosphere, and I don't know if it's because of the ozone's destruction or if that's just the normal side effect of the high levels of activity period.
Well,
Uh,
I know when we're close to Jupiter, we're enveloped by its Van Allen belt,
mm,
and so if Jupiter is,
that makes sense.
on the back 90 on the other side of the sun, then we might be exposed to more. And if it's closer to us, Jupiter's insane though. Jupiter's got all sorts of crazy activity. We don't even really know what's going on inside of it.
Yeah, I really just think of it as like it's not a whole nother sun, but it's like it feels like a protostar to me. That's how I think of it. Which is where, because it's such a fucking gigantic body, anything that gets close to us is probably gonna hit that shit first. That's of anything of substance. That's
Or get
I mean,
pulled away by it.
right. Well, obviously it has
If
to be
anything
in the
can
proper
get
trajectory.
if it can get past Saturn and Jupiter, then there's really not much that can stop it.
Yeah, it's not like we're not always on the same planar disk necessarily, so that wouldn't mean it would mean it would have to come in a specific trajectory, but the gravitation of that planet is just so fucking huge that again it's like you really gotta get the right trajectory to get past Jupiter and get to the inner part of the solar system and still have mass. Obviously the
That's a long
asteroid belt.
fucking distance too.
Yeah.
That's a really long distance to get past.
Yeah,
Saturn.
it's a very long distance.
I think it's one of those things that once we consider the scale of our solar system, it's actually quite incredible that Oumuamua did just even made it as far as it did, and that we saw it, and that we were able to track its trajectory through the solar system.
When Earth is closest to Jupiter, it's 365 million miles, and at the furthest, it's 553 million miles. It's fucking wild. Which, if 91.9 million miles to the sun, so
It's like 3 times the distance for us just to get to Jupiter.
it takes light 8 minutes to get here from the sun. Then that's like it's gonna take light
Another
fucking
24 more minutes to get to the
yeah.
Jupiter.
That's wild. That's really crazy.
I think it takes another it's something similar like that to get to Saturn. It takes like an hour or something dumb, 45 minutes to get to Saturn.
That's light.
Yeah.
That's fucking light, man. And yeah,
Like the
that's
idea we're going to
that's
send
rare.
humans to Enceladus.
guess our sci-fi has like fucked up our sense of travel, space travel a lot.
Like our most capable fusion reactors can only stay online for a few minutes. Like I think that's like the only place that we're going to get the necessary power to accelerate anything fast enough to go anywhere. But even then,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like we were talking about last week. You know, it's going to be a spaceship's got to be gigantic. It's going to be the size of a city. It's going to have agricultural facilities and industrial facilities where they can manufacture shit, and residential facilities, and like all the things. Except it's not going to be like it'll be a cruise ship, but it's not going to be fun.
Yeah.
Like nobody would be on it if they didn't have a job that was essential. And then they'd have some kind of school program so they could educate the children of the people that were, you know, or the children that were born on the ship, because it's going to be, 60 years.
Mm. Yep. Exactly right.
We can't accelerate a city-sized spaceship like we can accelerate a satellite. Fuck. Seriously, like if we could accelerate anything at the speed that we could get like a satellite to Saturn, I mean, I'm pretty sure that would like turn the humans inside it into like mush. Just kill everyone inside of it because we don't have inertial dampers.
Yeah, at least not yet.
I think that's like the kind of scene that would happen in the Quentin Tarantino Star Trek. He would have somebody trying to escape, and so they would disable the inertial damper so they could go a little bit faster, and then they would get away. But then the next time they got in the car, they'd forget to turn them back on. Or turn their spaceship back on, and then they would accelerate, and they would just splat in the back of the shuttlecraft. And so it docks in the spaceship, and people like they open it up like, what the fuck?
Yeah, and I always wonder how much those, well, obviously it's because of the writing, but how much they could work if when they get hit, the people still feel it.
Oh yeah.
Because you would think theoretically, if the inertial dampeners can work against warp, I'll be okay against the fucking hit against the shields. You shouldn't feel that, I would think. I mean, not to, again, who's to say until we actually build that shit and try it in the real world.
Man, maybe they have to turn inertial dampers off for warp travel so that you can move through the warp field without it shredding you. There's probably some explanation for this that neither of us have read about, that they've just kind of written off with hand waving. There has to be. That's the only way I can. That's the only way I can explain it. But inertial dampers aren't like exclusive to Star Trek. They have Star Wars has their own version of it. I'm pretty sure Battlestar Galactica has their own version of it. All of the big space franchises have some version of it, whether they talk about it or not. I always figured that, if inertial dampers failed, every time they got hit by something, people should be like flying to the ceiling and then dropping back down to the floor, or getting thrown halfway across the bridge. And that's why they really held on to things, because if there's no inertial dampers, like you might be standing where Worf was operating his console, but you might end up like on the main display, like on it, because now the nose of the ship is down, and Data is like hanging from the console, like only a few feet off of the screen. But he weighs like 600 pounds, and he'd probably break that screen.
So in Deep Space Nine, season 5, episode 2, people died from massive osteonecrosis. Every bone in their body's been shattered. Sound like inertial dampener failure, and the ship accelerated and people were thrown into the bulkheads.
Ooh, so they do explore it.
Yeah.
Ooh, ouch. Ouch. Well, good. They should establish some like, thresholds that you just don't cross.
So they have like the external inertial dampener, which is effectively like a parking brake, and then the internal inertial dampener. And if the internal inertial dampener goes offline, that's when people go flying.
Mm.
If the external inertial dampener goes down, that doesn't. If they that just means, like, if they're not using it, that just means they've lost a function that they're not necessarily going to be using. But it's not necessarily
That's like
the
traction
one that's
control.
right.
They probably don't need it. In the Star Trek game I play, there are some modules that give bonuses to inertia, so that when you're engaged in space combat and you want to fling your starship around something, it'll still drift a little bit.
Mm.
But there are also minuses to inertia that'll essentially act as a brake. And of course, like a carrier, because it's the size of 5 ships, it moves slowly anyways and has lots of inertia.
How often do you play that game? I like downloaded it once and I could never get into it for some reason.
Oh man, I had to like grind through probably 30, 40 episodes before I had a ship that was capable enough of just being fun. And before I had a character that was loaded up with equipment, and all of my away team members had equipment that made it fun to go play the missions on like advanced settings. It's definitely you're free to grind if you want to type of game. And so I find myself replaying several missions to get, all 3 of the modules that give the bonuses. And sometimes that's worth it. And then I'll go and play some really hard mission and test out this new equipment. And that's kind of fun. So, in the early stage to get anywhere, it was probably an hour or 2 a night to get a character, to get a tune advanced enough to be fun to play, have a ship that's fun to play.
Ooh, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a pretty serious investment in time to have a fun ship. Most of the ships they give you are crap. Like,
Well, and 2 hours a night for how long?
months,
How long did you,
2 or 3 months
Jeez.
before it started to be really, really fun to play. And now it's at the point where like, I put in 20 minutes a night during event time, and I can get my event token, and at the end of the year they give me a really fancy ship. So I've got 2 really fancy ships, and that make it really fun. And then I've got a couple of fancy ships that aren't very fun because I never put the time in to make them any good.
See, I can see once you get to a certain point.
Also, those ships, once I
Making
have
it-
them, they're unlocked across all of my character accounts, across the account.
Mhm.
So I can start a new character, and then I have access to all of the advanced ships, like right away.
Yeah, those games where you have to unlock stuff, but it unlocks across all the accounts is like you really have to decide if it's worth it or not, but before dedicating all that time. So
Yeah.
there's a couple I'm playing now, like Lost Ark is one. What was the other one? Forza is kind of like that, even though it's like paid, but the way that they do the seasons, like you can't unlock all the cars at once.
Yeah.
Um, and shit, some of the cars don't even exist until they upload them in there, and that happens seasonally. But
Well, I'm at this point with the game where it's extremely easy for me to unlock a set to gain special powers or whatever. And so the limitation now comes in which ship do I want to put it in and dedicate to this build so I can run certain missions with this kind of ship.
mm-hmm.
And if it wasn't for this Star Trek tie-in, I would have given up on it a long time ago. It's really because they manipulate the emotional heartstrings really, really handily, with as much active, like, current theme, and then they tie it into old themes really well. So there's a lot of continuity, and they've really managed to tie, like, all of the Star Trek storylines together in a very useful way. Like, it all makes sense in a weird way, because you can explore the storylines on your own terms. Feel like you're a part of the action. Like, I never feel bad when I kill a bunch of Borg, but I'm kind of hesitant to kill like Jem'Hadar, because some of them might not be bad. They might just be following orders.
Yeah.
And
Jem'Hadar, I didn't like them at first, but
they're
it
cool.
grew on me as a storyline for sure.
Yeah, they're a really interesting sideline story, like slaves that, you know, and they're drugged.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they can't get out of that. That's, like, horrible.
Yeah.
I think the more I watch Star Trek, of course, and the more I play this game, the more I appreciate, like, Jem'Hadar and Cardassians, and by extension Bajorans too. But I think the Cardassians are actually the most interesting. Like, they're the most troubled, and they're not like deeply flawed. They're just like, they've got ghosts that they don't know how to fight. And then they've got,
Well, I think they are deeply flawed in many ways, in that they can't not lie. They have to be the most haughty person in the room at all times. Like, they actively push everyone's buttons, and then they fall back on their
but that's
nature as why they're doing it.
But that's all the ones that we see.
I mean, that's all of them.
No,
the only one.
There were a few that that are, like, interesting characters. They all die.
But the ones that don't act like that are like half Bajoran, or like,
and they die, like
traitors.
That episode.
And a lot of them that don't act like that are traitors to the Cardassian Empire. So
yeah,
it's like it that's part of their culture, which is why I think, in the sense of, the only ones that don't act like that end up getting exiled, like fucking Garrick.
Yeah.
And then the only way he got back in the Empire was acting like a Cardassian. And then at that point, you realize he never stopped being that. He just covered it up.
Well, he was like
covered it up really well.
He was like a quadruple agent.
Yeah.
He was serving,
which is also why he was interesting.
Yeah, because he was serving Bajor and Cardassia and the Maquis and the Obsidian Order, and in some ways the Federation. And holy shit, that's more. That's a lot. Garrick was always my favorite character in that show.
Yeah, because then he even attacked Worf on the episode we just watched, and it's like, he wasn't afraid to throw down either.
No. I think, it's never a good idea to engage in fisticuffs with a tailor, because they've got all sorts of, like, scissors and sharp tools and pins and needles and things like that. Machines that can run thread through, like, body armor, and
always got scissors handy for sure. At least.
So tailor, chef, obviously artist, surgeon. Those are occupations that handle blades and sharp tools regularly. What's some others? Like sharp hand tools. Gardener. There are examples of, like, in thrillers where the surgeon or the doctor is the bad guy and they use their tools, but we don't really see as many tailors, do we? We had the barber, the demon barber of Fleet Street, whatever.
right. Um,
Artists
yeah,
are
I don't
already
think that.
crazy, and they apply their crazy towards making art. So maybe that's why we don't see many artist serial killers in media.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that is something that really crosses over uh, with any other demographic specifically, except for sociopathy.
Yeah,
Like that might be the only.
I don't think being a tailor is high on the list of professions for sociopathy.
No, not really,
I think that's
because
like
it's not very profitable.
it's also there's very little spotlight unless you're at the highest of the highest end, and then at that point you're not the tailor anymore. You're the designer,
Mm.
and the designers seem to be killed off by their lovers. Poor bastards.
Yeah, the tailor and the designer are not usually the same person. It seems like.
I'm sure there's some like tailors out there, some like some guys that are like masters of making suits fit perfectly. I bet there's some guys like that who can make a suit from scratch. That's like probably somebody else's design that's augmented, obviously, but like I'm
I
sure that
mean,
there's.
even on Project Runway, when the people make the stuff, it's like when it's going to be produced, they're not the ones that are making the pieces that are going on the shelves. It's like they might make the original, but then like they take it to a factory or like a.
So this is kind of related. I saw this thing about Black History Month and how Target is pushing this brand, Jolie Noir, and it's designed by black women, and I think they're from like Atlanta, and so they're like tapping into their heritage, and there's some pushback about this because some of their products are manufactured in Spain or Portugal, and some of their products are. I mean, these things are being sold in Target, so some of these products are definitely being made in China, and there's like pushback about this because they're just engaging in more capitalism,
Mm,
and it's not like it's not like the version of black capitalism that builds back into its community. This is capitalism that feeds pockets and shareholders. And I thought
yeah.
it was just really interesting to me. It's like, man, like there are so many layers to this that once you start picking apart, it, it once you start picking it apart, it reveals that it's this kind of like rotten onion.
And I'm always skeptical of stuff that's like monetizing anything. Just period. But
I mean, Michael Jordan endorsing Hanes underwear. Okay, Hanes makes good underwear. That makes sense. But I don't see like I never remembered any kind of like. I mean, Hanes isn't in the newspaper for supporting black athletes. That whole era is over, I guess.
well, and then I'm not sure if Michael Jordan's support of black athletes was like long term beneficial or if it was just him exploiting black athletes yet again.
Mm,
Because it's like black people exploiting black culture is a net negative, not a net positive.
yeah.
It's like them adopting the white commercial practices and then applying it to black culture and just happening to be black and then
Well, that's just black capitalism.
profiting. Right. I mean, but that's not even black capitalism. That's just like black people doing capitalism. Because then I would argue there's like black capitalism is a different type of like being able to operate and make a profit when you don't actually have a leg up and you don't actually have a bank loan and you don't actually have an inheritance and you don't actually have all these other things. So that's where I'm like, black people just reproducing white capitalism. I don't think that's black capitalism because that's where, like I said, I feel like there's not to say that it's good or better. I just think that there is like
No, I think I know what you're saying. You're saying that there's black people doing capitalism is different from black capitalism.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
then I think part of it is like within black capitalism, you get the the drug deals and the shit where it's like it's not all good necessarily, but within those drug dealers, you'll see that like black capitalism revolves around giving back to the community and shit like that and not taking away from the community and zapping it out. So there's a difference between like white capitalism, which is like extracting from wherever for oneself as an individual versus black capitalism, which has an onus to like give back to the community. I think that's definitely a specific cultural difference, which is where then you see the black people that then go in and do white capitalism come out looking like the Israel Adesanyas and the fucking Terrence fucking I forget the dude's name, but all the UFC fighters coming out supporting Joe Rogan. That's like black people adopting white capitalism where you're like, oh, it's okay to say the N-word for clicks, like just as long as it was in the proper context. Like that's like black people adopting white capitalism. Cause then you'll see like
we didn't he recently lose to Robert can't remember his name. I watched a really good Israel Adesanya fight the other night.
No, he won.
He won. Okay. I remember just watching, and it was like I looked away, and it was over right as I looked away. It was that quick. It was really good. There was another fight that night that was like also really kind of like out of nowhere. I think it was last Saturday, not last Saturday, Saturday, the week before this, last Saturday. I don't even know why I opened up that link. I haven't watched UFC in months.
Yeah, they've really watered down their content. I mean, just that's what happens. You have too many shows. It's like
maybe
there's no
maybe it was the
impetus.
Beast that lost. I think it was
Derek Lewis.
Yeah, I think he lost that night.
Yeah, he just lost to Tai Tuivasa. Yeah.
Man, I really like watching him fight, but I gotta say that it was like very disappointing.
They hyped him up way too much. He was neither one of those guys is that great.
Yeah,
Their
but
skills are okay.
He's fun to watch though because he's like big and kind of tubby.
Oh, for sure. I mean, and he just like swings wild, which is where ultimately when you get to the top 3 in that division, he just isn't good enough. Yeah, exactly. And you see over and over where both of those guys get to the top and it just looks like they don't belong in the same octagon because the skill level's so vast. But UFC does a good job of hyping them up.
I think it's a lot of it is the rapid cuts from camera to camera angle. I think they're able to make it seem like they're doing more. They're doing more with less, with the rapid transitions and the quick replays.
I realized I had a friend over yesterday, and the fights were the ones that were on yesterday were on, and I'm sitting there having to explain why two people fighting is boring, and there's nothing happening, and I'm like, "Fuck, this is such a weird place to be in as a mixed martial arts fan, because they're like, so
That's like peak doldrums.
what they're like, what's happening right now? And I'm like, well, it's not just your imagination. They are just kind of hugging. Yes, they are working, but it is kind of just hugging. Because
They're holding each other.
Yeah, but when you're like holding somebody against the fence and both people are stuck in that situation, like there's times where it just looks like they're hugging, and that's like, it's like, well, we're in the wet blanket part of the fight, and the judges will eat this shit up, and the guy that's like being the wet blanket is kind of winning, but we're at this period in the fights where that's like more often the accurate description than not. So yeah, the Derek Lewises and the Tai Tuivasas that come in and don't wet blanket make things enjoyable, but then they run into the wet blankets at the tops of the divisions and just puts out the fire.
Yeah.
Everybody at the top of every division is not a wet blanket. Let me make that clear. But it's usually around the number 3, number 4 rank that you get the wet blanket, because it's like a safe way to win a fight in the judge's eyes.
Yeah.
Or from the way the judges score cards.
Well, it's like the intermegative, whatever. It's like his octopus technique, right? He just kind of drapes himself over the person and slowly feeds their arm into a position where they can't move it, and then twists their legs around, and then.
Well, and then you realize, like, when new people start watching, how much you don't actually see human bodies normal and the rest of normal life. It's like people are clothed most of the time, whereas UFC fighters, they might as well be in their underwear. It's like barely underwear half the time, because I don't think about that in the sense of like, yeah, these people are basically fighting each other in their underwear that has a logo, an advertisement on it. But when you're watching it for the fights, there's like nothing sexual about it in that person's head. I mean, I'm sure there's some people, but you know, I'm not looking at it like that. So when somebody comes in and like, oh, these people are like half naked, like, and it's like off, it throws them off because they're used to everybody having their clothes on. It's like, oh shit, I hadn't even thought about that perspective.
Man, if somebody looks at UFC and thinks that that's like sexual in any way, I'm actually concerned about the kind of sex that they think that they're going to have.
I don't think necessarily like the fighting part, but just like the people like coming out and like the part where they like take off their clothes to get ready for the fight, and like it is basically like, well, because then one of the fights we were watching, dude was like dancing on the way in. So it did kind of like, if this is your first time watching, it does look like, okay, is this Magic Mike or what? Like,
okay, if somebody,
what are these people watching?
If they're coming in with some like Chippendales music and they're doing like a Chippendales routine, okay, I can see how somebody might mistake it for something else.
Well, and that's kind of the problem is like.
But if somebody like
Johnny
if they get
Walker,
out there and
when
they
he was
like
walking in, he was like getting way too into the fucking walkout music, and he's like basically humping the dude's leg that he's like, it's like, okay, this is a real horrible introduction to mixed martial arts. I could totally see how like up until that point where I'm like, man, I get it now in retrospect, but yeah, for somebody coming into mixed martial arts in 2022, it looks real weird. Cause yeah, there's still octagon girls and shit like walking around with their ass cheeks and tits hanging out. Like, of course they're gonna be thinking there's something sexual when you got like these random chicks to remind you what round it is in case you fucking are too stupid to remember. Like, oh no, let me make sure you look at these boobs and ass to know what round it is.
Yeah,
Got your attention? Here you go. 3.
never mind that there is a giant display
Yeah, never mind that.
that
We
tells
need
you.
a whole human person. But we're also going to degrade her and objectify her in the process. Yes, 3. She did. Yeah, we're not going to give you the score, but we'll give you these ring octagon girls.
So when it's lady
To
fighters, do they have
objectify.
octagon guys?
No, of course they're still going to keep the octagon girls.
Yeah.
Because they're assuming that the people coming to watch the women fighting are lesbians. They're there for women too.
Well, that's just silly. They could be there for both. They could be, greedy.
Oh man. No, and then you see like the crowds at the actual events invite. The only time I've ever actually seen a crowd of women was not a mixed martial arts event. It was like that Jake Paul boxing shit. And you're like, oh shit, there's like actually women in the audience and they don't look like that they're like there to try to fuck the other fighters or the female fighters. Or like it's like there's definitely a stark difference between that audience and the mixed martial arts audience. It's 100% not the same. Because then the bare knuckle audience is like, those are the lesbians that they thought would come to the women's fighting matches, but they're actually there to support the women fighters, not to try to fuck them. So it's like this weird, it's like they actually garnered the audience that they thought they could get by strutting around women in bikinis. Like the same way they thought that they could objectify women to get men, they thought that would work on lesbian women. And like it didn't. But the bare knuckle, just like the actual fighting, is what got the lesbians. It's crazy. Because you see it where you're like, there's something.
Jake Paul is the second person in the list of YouTube boxers.
Who?
Jake Paul. He's number 1 is Logan Paul. Number 3 is Tyrone Woodley, followed by Tommy Fury, KSI, Ben Askren, Floyd Mayweather. God, he's like got to be like twice the age of Jake Paul. He totally is. Jake Paul's only 25. Oh no, he's not. Floyd Mayweather is only 44.
Floyd fought Logan.
Oh, he did.
Yeah.
Huh.
They're not even remotely in the same weight class, which is why it was hilarious.
Huh.
I feel like Logan must have had 30 pounds on him, maybe 40.
Wow. Apparently, Floyd owes Logan something between $5 and $10 million for their pay-per-view. Oh man! So does that mean that Logan Paul actually defeated Floyd somehow in some way?
I mean, not really.
No. How much was that fight worth?
Not until he gets money, right?
Oh yeah, no, good point.
It's like that's another L. If he's like, oh, I gotta sue him to get this money. Well, shit. Until you get the money, that's another L. Because he's gonna have to come out of pocket for the expenses until the lawsuit.
I don't think it even.
If they win,
even if he wins, this dude is an idiot. He lost $3.5 million on fake Pokemon cards.
yeah. Yep. Same person. Which is where you're like, it doesn't. Having money has nothing to do with intelligence.
Yeah, not at all.
That's just true.
$3.5 million on Pokemon. He spent more on Pokemon than everyone that I know who's interested in Pokemon combined. He lost more of it than they've spent and probably still have in their Pokemon card collections. That, oh man. You know, that's one of those things that's wrong with this world, that there are people out there who have lost more of something that is absolutely a luxury than significant more portion of the people have even come close to thinking about spending. What the fuck is wrong with people? Like, good for him. Good for whoever scammed him. Good for him. Good for the guy that somehow managed to amass $3.5 million to lose on Pokemon. Good for the trader who got their slice of the trade. Good for Pokemon International for, you know. Actually, no, they didn't make any money on this because he lost. They were fake. So, sucks for Pokemon International.
Well, the only reason he found out they were fake is because he opened it.
Oh!
After all that, where if they would have not even opened it, that shit would have just been still sitting there or resold at a higher rate under the pretense that they were authentic.
Well, that's even... So it's a good thing that it took a bunch of counterfeit Pokemon cards off the market. That's a good thing. Way to take one for the team, guy. Oh, man.
Well, it looks like, again, there's a signal that they may sign a ceasefire.
Oh, in Ukraine?
Yeah.
Good.
It's called between Emmanuel Macron and Putin, which at this point, it's like, the United States is so absurd when it comes to news related, like, to this shit, where they're like, we found out information that says Putin's about to attack. It's like, where is this information coming from?
They
Who are
probably
your fucking sources?
Reddit.
Right? Yeah, come on. Was it your uncle told you? Fucking, you heard it, you overheard some guys at the bar talking. And this shit where they just... the way that they're trying to, like, they were trying to make it seem as if they had information saying Russia was going to do a false flag. It's like, oh, so you guys are acknowledging that governments do this shit, but you're going to make it seem like Russia is the only government to ever do a false flag attack, and you're trying to call this shit out. Okay, I'm going to remember this, Next time something happens in America and you're trying to pretend you didn't do a false flag attack, because if you're trying to say Russia is about to do we have information that they're about to do a false flag. Oh, so this is a thing. This is a common thing. This isn't like conspiracy theory. If our government's coming up with these conspiracy theories now, are you saying that there are some that are conspiracy fact? So there are a lot of things about them trying to call out a Russian false flag that are just like, man, you guys are not self-aware at all. Apparently, I didn't trust them in the first place, but the idea that the American government is trying to like de-escalate Ukraine in the worst possible way, because the way that they're doing it isn't actually helping. What Macron is doing is helping, but what America's doing is just seemingly making it worse by inflaming Americans into thinking that we're about to have a fucking war, which isn't actually going to affect us directly, because it's gonna be if it's an actual war, this shit's happening in Europe. We're not seeing any of that. Like, unless you're about to try to fly to Ukraine, there's nothing that's actually going to affect us directly. So the way that they're throwing up all these like red flag war signals as if somehow the front is going to come to American shores, it's completely fucking bullshit. But then on top of that, like, we still have structural racism here. Fix that shit. Fix that shit before you go fucking around in Ukraine. Not to say that they can't, like, support peace treaties or support allies when they're under threat, but they've already stated they're not going to. So fuck off with that bullshit and try to fix the structural racism that you have at home, instead of like pointing fingers at Russia and all this other shit. Because it's like
they're dealing with.
Really tired of it.
I'm really pretty sure that Russia and Ukraine tensions have existed for like thousands of years.
Yeah, I mean, to say the least.
I mean,
but
this just isn't this just like a fucked up version of the Middle East tensions, just further north?
Yeah, it's the same shit, which is where I'm not about to let them fucking gaslight me into having more concern about some shit in Ukraine when structural racism is still a huge problem here. It's not going away. It's getting worse, if anything. All of the shit that's happening with the cops and with the fucking banks and with the land and like with the subsidies to the white farmers and none to the black farmers, like all the shit that's happening with structural racism here is so horrible. I don't want to hear shit about Uyghurs. I don't want to hear shit about Ukraine. Fix this fucking shit here before we try to send any money, any aid, any fucking moral upright anywhere else. Fix this fucking shit here first. And then come to me about some fucking Uyghurs or some fucking Ukraine.
Well,
because right now, it's not that I don't care, but I kind of don't fucking care. It's not to say that the people, it's like, I do care about Ukrainian citizens, but our government has no fucking business going anywhere until they fucking fix the shit with black people and Native Americans here. They need to fix, and the Muslim population that they fucked over, and the people, the Asian Americans after World War II, they need to fix that shit, because that shit still ain't fixed, because we're still getting anti-Asian violence in America. That's a huge problem. So we need to fix our own fucking shit. I don't want to hear about fucking Ukraine, because it sounds like Macron is dealing with that shit, and our government is just making it fucking worse.
Well, I mean,
stoking flames of
Europe,
Cold War.
Europe's a complex entity. Ukraine is a fully functioning country, but they don't need us to do anything.
Right? It's very white savior, given white saviorism.
It's like American saviorism.
Yeah.
Like, there's an entire union of European nations that can help Ukraine. They're already there. They don't have to get a bunch of shit on boats or on airplanes. They don't have to send a bunch of American citizens to do a job in a country where people are going to stare at them and be like, why the fuck are you here?
Well, and then it feels even more like there's a generation of people who feel slighted because of the Cold War and they can't let that shit go. And I'm like, I wasn't really alive for most of the Cold War. So this whole Russian like antagonism is comical at best, fucking pathetic remnants of xenophobic childlike gang warfare at worst. Because that's where I'm like, what the fuck are they even fighting for anymore? Like, the U.S. is just as fascist as Russia, and Russia's just as fascist as the U.S. Why don't they just fucking kiss and have a fascist fucking hug and be like, yeah, let's go fucking oppress our people together or some shit? Yeah. But no, they're like, I want to oppress people this way. No, I want to oppress people this way. No, this is American oppression. No, this is Russian oppression. And they just can't fucking, like, bro, y'all should just get together and fucking oppress people if y'all want to oppress, like, for fuck's sake. But no, they want us to kill each other for their specific type of oppression. And I'm so tired of it. I'm so tired of, I don't care. I really don't care anymore because they're gonna do it anyway.
Have we actually had a period of time in the last like 60 years without a proxy war between the United States and Russia?
We haven't. I don't care anymore. I really don't care anymore. I can't hide it. It's not that I've been hiding it. I'm like to the point, I don't care. I just don't care because they're just going to do what the fuck they want. My vote doesn't matter. My opinion doesn't matter. The fact that I'm a pacifist doesn't matter. I don't own a fucking gun. That doesn't matter. Nothing I do matters with the Russian, an American like antagonism. So I'm going to stop fucking caring. I'm going to stop caring because it's not worth me stressing out and losing my life energy over some shit that I can't help. So I release myself from the Russian-Ukrainian situation because our government is going to do what the fuck they want anyway. So I release myself.
Let's see. Ukraine's products, painted wooden eggs, babushka, rag dolls, ceramics, handmade lacquered wooden boxes, folk blouses, chocolate, and folk music. Those are distinct Ukrainian products. And their big commodity is corn, followed by wheat, and then potatoes.
They're not far from Indiana.
No, that sounds like that sounds a lot like Indiana.
Yeah.
Painted wooden eggs. Handmade lacquered wooden boxes. That's totally some Indiana shit.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Man.
But I get the younger generation. They don't care either. Like, they don't care about any of this shit, man. But I get it. And I completely empathize with them too, because then, like, why should they? What should young kids care about besides just like their day-to-day enjoyment? Because I feel like at least if you enjoy day-to-day, you got something out of it. So that's where I completely understand that approach to, like, to them it feels like the end of the world, even though shit, if you look at history, it perpetually seems like the end of the world to somebody. There's always somebody for like the last 5,000 years, like, it's the end of the world. They've been saying that shit for 5,000 years, man, at least, if not longer. Well, for 5,000 recorded years.
But maybe they're saying it's the end of their world.
Right.
You know, the end of their world as they know it might be, you know, not wait, the end is nigh. That's it. Yeah, it might be nigh, whatever that actually means. And so their supply chains are collapsing because they rely on some really weird esoteric grain that you can only harvest on like moonlit nights in like Peru or something really obscure. Their world's coming to an end because they can't get their fancy shaving cream, or they can't get quinoa because global supply chain problems. Or, you know, the business model that their business relies on is falling apart because it wasn't robust enough to withstand 2 years of pandemic. And of course, we realize now that very few business models are robust enough to withstand that. They have to be a Walmart or an Amazon or a Target. They have to have extremely deep pockets to be able to withstand this kind of economic event. I don't think that we appreciate just how fragile like some of our systems really are. It's like we want everything to be really resilient and robust, but the reality is so many of these things are, you know, no electricity, no internet.
Well, and I feel like the story from Aesop's Fables is like the ants stockpiled for the winter and the grasshopper didn't, and the ants were fine and the grasshopper was out. But it's like, well, that's for one winter, not for like 17 winters. You're not supposed to stockpile shit for fucking more than one winter at a time. So this notion of stockpiling for one winter does have a point of diminishing returns where like too much of a hoard ends up affecting everyone negatively. So I don't know what story about insects or animals we can do to be like, hey, you can stockpile, but don't hoard.
Well, you know what happened the next season? That ant hill that was so successful the previous winter, they did exactly what you described. Except they overharvested, and some of the neighboring ant hills did not reach their numbers. And so later that winter, when supplies were running low, the other ant hills descended upon the prosperous ant hill and took their fucking wheat. So the lesson is don't take more than you need, and make sure that the surrounding communities also have supplies.
One of the story is share.
Yeah. Poor bastards can't manage multiple anthills. That's why they're like a highly successful organized civilization that never got past the anthill.
Yeah, that's the one thing I've seen is like that whole independent approach where you have the prepper that holds themselves off. It's like, well, that only works for a little while, but you really do need to be sharing and building a community so that you don't have people descending upon your hoard, raiding your shit.
Yeah, 'cause they'll know. They'll definitely know.
Word will travel.
That there's that one holdout who's not being cool, and then that's why we got to work together.
Yeah. Keep the raiders out.
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Randos Show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you.